It's become something of an Autosport tradition at the end of the Formula One season to ask the team principals to rank their top 10 drivers. The voting is done anonymously, and then we award points to each driver voted for according to the F1 point system. So first gets 25 all the way down to 1 for 10th. Results are in, and I'm joined by Jonathan Noble and James Roberts. John, you helped compile the list and ask the team bosses for their top 10. No prizes for guessing who number one is, almost unanimously Lewis Hamilton. Congratulations to him. So we won't waste time discussing that. I think everyone agrees that he's been F1's outstanding driver this year. But the list from 2 to 10 is much more intriguing. So let's switch it up, and we'll start with number 10. Team principals voted Nico Hulkenberg, winner of Class B for Renault, unofficial Class B, of course. What do we make of that choice?
Yeah, it's probably about right. I think he had a good season. Out-qualified Carlos Sainz more often than not. Outscored Carlos Sainz. And we know Sainz is, a good driver. Yeah. Not by second rate to go to McLaren next season. I think pretty spot on. No real major mistakes from Nico apart from Baku.
That's traditional for him to crash there, isn't it?
Him and Baku, something happens. Corner. Oh, Spa first corner, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, 10th. I think that's probably about right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Agree with that. Okay, moving on. Hulkenberg, a worthy choice at number 10 from our team principals. Number 9, a man without a drive for next season, Esteban Ocon, Force India driver. Down 4, actually, from last year's ranking, so not as impressive, according to the team principals, as he was in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable he's not in Formula 1 next season, but he was the unlucky man from the Ricciardo shake-up. The bombshell of Daniel switch to Renault.
Well, he had 2 drives sorted out potentially at one point, didn't he?
Yeah, it was a bad week for him because he had 2 drives. Could have gone to McLaren, could have gone to Renault. Ended up with neither and out of Force India.
And no room at the inn at Williams either.
No, so he'll be on the sidelines. I mean, he had a solid year. Maybe not as impressive because the Force India wasn't as impressive. It wasn't as easy for that car to be forceful at the front. The midfield battle was much tighter. So it's not really a surprise that he's slipped back, I don't think.
No. Did out-qualify his teammate Sergio Perez, but ultimately finished behind him in the point standings. But I think Esteban has, given the season he's had in terms of emotionally the turmoil and not being in with a seat and how he's dealt with all of that, I think he's driven pretty well, considering that there's been so much more else going on around him. So
you think he should be a bit higher?
Potentially, yes.
Moving on to number 8, Valtteri Bottas. Up 2 from last year, so according to the team principals, even though he didn't win a race and he won 3 last season, he's been judged to have had a better season this year than last season. So what the hell are they talking about there?
Bottas' season was really one of two halves, really. The second half was pretty poor, to be honest, but I think his head was down after he couldn't fight for the championship. Team orders in Russia didn't help, and then you mirror that with the start of the season, which could have been fantastic. He made that mistake in qualifying in Australia, but then came within 1 lap of winning in Bahrain. Could have won in China, pending the safety car, but pulled the pit stop strategy on Vettel and was on course to win. Baku should have won.
Russia he should have won later.
Yeah, Russia should have won. But going back to the start of the season, those 3 races had gone his way. 3 wins, leading the championship, heading into Spain. Different season.
And how did you see Bottas' season, Jimmy? You went to see him in Finland, didn't you, in the summer? What was his mood like at that point? Was he still... Because he seemed very down at the end of the year.
Yeah, if you remember Hungary, he'd just been described as a wingman. Do you remember that?
Yes.
By Toto Wolff.
And there was lots of scrabbling to clarify exactly what wingman meant, wasn't there?
And so he was a bit frustrated. He had a difficult race in Hungary, but Toto...
It was a terrible race for him.
Toto said, he was a good wingman for getting Lewis in the right position. And then there was a 2-week break, and I went to see him in his hometown of Nastola in Finland, because every year he does his charity duathlon event there. And we sat by the rocks by the lake and reflected on the season so far. And I said, I think I mentioned the wingman comment to him, and he said, we're both wingmen.
What, you and him?
Like they were at a nightclub.
So he got over it at that stage, but and then at that point he was still looking to try and get on top of Lewis as we went to Spa, Monza, Singapore. But Lewis was just in such top form that he just left him behind, didn't he? So it's amazing when you look at the statistics. Lewis 11 wins. Valtteri 0 in the championship winning car. So
and 5th in the championship as well in the championship winning car.
I think he'll have a winter where he'll just really needs to clear his head and come back stronger next year. But it's interesting having Esteban on the sidelines now in the Mercedes garage, so he can see that there's a real threat there.
I don't think you can take away from the fact there was pace there during the season. Should have won Russia, could have had those wins, so I think he deserved to be in the top 10.
Okay.
It's never going to be easy to beat Lewis, is it?
No, that's true. That's true. On to number 7, a man who did beat Lewis in one race at least this year for the win, Kimi Raikkonen. Much maligned in his second spell at Ferrari, but this year it seemed that he was quite impressive. But he was voted 7th in the Team Principals top 10 last year as well, so they thought he had an equally impressive season last year as this. What did you make of Raikkonen's performances? Is that fair?
Yeah, probably similar. Too many mistakes in when it matters. Q3, for example.
Q3, yeah.
Always
considering how the pace advantage the Ferrari had in the middle stage of this season, he should have delivered more. But ultimately, it was his pace that caused problems for Ferrari later in the season. At Monza, he was the one who took pole position. He was the one who was battling Vettel at the start, and Vettel wasn't going to let him go away. So, he was good. And I think ultimately, it's right that Kimi is staying in Formula One because he's a great character. The fans love him. He's got the passion, quite a fun attitude. I think it's just good to have him around, and it'd be fascinating at Sauber in an environment he loves and is happy and is away from the pressure of the Tifosi, to see if he can thrive and keep going for another 10 years.
Well, he was. It's inevitable, isn't it? He will outlast all of us in Formula One. But he was actually Ferrari's best scoring driver in the second half of the season. He was stronger than Vettel. So, is there an argument to say that maybe he should be higher on this list?
I think I would agree with everything that John said. Actually, I think 7th is probably the right place for him, but I completely agree that he's getting a second chance to stay in or another chance to stay in Formula One. There must be something in Ferrari that causes. There must be a mounting pressure that both drivers must have, because you look at the amount of mistakes that Sebastian made, and as you're right, Q3 mistakes that Kimi would make. So I think in a different environment, maybe Sauber, where there is less pressure, I think you'll probably see fewer mistakes next season.
Okay, moving on to number 6, the driver, in fact, that Kimi is seat swapping with for next season, Charles Leclerc, Rookie of the Year, as voted for at the Autosport Awards as well. Number 6, a new entry, obviously, because he's new to Formula 1 this year. What do we make of that decision? Leclerc deserving of top 6 place? Should he be higher than that, given how impressive he was and the fact he's earned a Ferrari drive?
No, I think that's probably about right. He struggled at the beginning. I think the step up from Formula 2 into Formula 1 with a car that wasn't the greatest was a bit of an eye-opener for him. I spoke to him in Abu Dhabi, and he recalled at the first race, 20 laps in, thinking, he must be near the end now, coming on the radio and the team saying 40 laps to go. So a lot of adjustment for him to go through, but I think what was most impressive was the progression he showed. Some drivers can have make some progress, fall back and plateau, but all along the way he got better and better and better, and the Ferrari rumour mill, all that hoo-ha about what he was doing didn't affect him. I think he's going to put Sebastian Vettel under a lot of pressure next year.
How do you see Leclerc at Ferrari next year? You mentioned just a second ago the pressure that is created by being at Maranello. So how is Leclerc, as a driver with so little experience but clearly a lot of ability, how is he going to cope with that?
I think Charles has proved in his career already that he's been able to perform under extreme pressure, and we saw in Formula 2 the weekend that his father was very poorly. He performed miracles on the racetrack, and then after he died as well, he was still able to compartmentalise his focus and his driving ability to perform at the highest level. So I think he's very, very mentally strong, and I think that will steer him in good stead at Ferrari next year. You're right, there were early mistakes, weren't there? And then suddenly in Baku he performed brilliantly, and there was talk post-Canada of even switching him into the Ferrari midway through this season, which would have been extraordinary. So I think he'll be a great fit at Ferrari, and I think he'll be there for a while to come as well.
Number 5, down 1 actually on last year, is Daniel Ricciardo, star of the early part of the season and winner of 2 races, but it kind of all went a bit wrong for him after that.
It all went wrong from the start, really. Race 1 getting the grid penalty through the problem with the red flag in practice, and Bahrain the early retirement, and it's just been a season where it never really got going. It was too bitty. Great performance in Monaco, pole position on a weekend that Max got it wrong. He's putting Max under tremendous pressure at that stage, losing his MGK in the race and having to fight off and back everyone up. So, sensational performance. But I think he just lost the momentum. He lost the confidence. It didn't happen. I think the season didn't really click. Pole position in Mexico was great. So a few little peaks, but I think quite a disappointing season. And I'm not, based on how it all panned out, maybe he could have been behind Charles there in terms of overall performance. But I think we have to acknowledge, on his good days, he was phenomenal, as he always is.
Yeah.
But probably a change of atmosphere will be good for him anyway.
Do you think that negotiation period, obviously that dragged on through the summer months, and just before the summer break his future was finally settled and he made the shock decision to quit Red Bull and move to Renault? Do you think there was an element of that playing into his season in terms of a distraction, that he wasn't quite focused on the job at hand?
Possibly. I remember each race we went to at the start of the year, every Thursday around his media briefing, it would be what's going on, what's the latest. And it started at the end of last year and it went through testing and he was just able to bat it away. But clearly, if you get asked about it and you're thinking about it, there was a link, wasn't there, very early in the season? Had he done something with Ferrari as well? So it was a continuous thing. But during that time, he still, as you say, performed brilliantly on the racetrack. And a highlight for me this year, and it was voted the F1 Racing Overtake of the Year, was his move in Shanghai. On the back straight, he got Lewis and Sebastian, and then I think it was into turn 6, 7, all deep on the brakes, past Valtteri Bottas for the win. And you look at Max in that same race on the same strategy, was clumsy with Lewis, hit Sebastian. So there have been days this year where he's just been absolutely stellar, and that Monaco was good examples of his brilliance.
And number 5, you'd have him there, or higher, lower? How do you see that?
I think given the whole season, you'd have to say he's higher than somebody who's on that list, who we're going to get to, who drives in red.
Interesting. Don't give too much away.
No, I'll try not to.
Okay, on to number 4. Up 2 from the 2017 list is outgoing McLaren and Formula 1 driver Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, it's really hard to judge Fernando's season because McLaren hasn't been...
They've been a shambles, haven't they, as far as results go?
Been nowhere near where we expected them to be. The start of the season wasn't too bad. Fernando was pulling that car to places that were a surprise when you know how bad that car was in the end. So he's done well, but there are also races where he didn't seem particularly interested, or the focus was elsewhere, or getting frustrated on the radio and times. So I think he's probably the most difficult one to judge on how great a season he did. He clean sweep against Stoffel van Dorn. We know Stoffel's not as bad as he's been made to appear this season with the qualifying performances. So, is that where the McLaren was and Fernando was performing miracles, or was Stoffel a broken man and Fernando doing just enough to stay ahead? We don't know. But the team bosses obviously got their opinion that he's up there. But I'm not sure I'd have him, ahead of even maybe Charles and Daniel for where the peaks were.
Yeah. Well, maybe those impressive or miraculous, as he would surely claim they were, performances at the start of the season elevate him right up, and maybe he's dropped back slightly on the basis that the second half of the season he was a bit less interested. Jimmy, did you get the impression that Fernando was kind of done with Formula 1 after he announced his sabbatical in France?
I tell you what made me laugh was the last 3 laps of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, where he just went straight through the turn 9, 10 chicane. I'm amazed we haven't seen it on any clips or any little highlight reels, because he just clearly, I'm not going to brake there anymore. But he was still able to monitor the time difference he had. So the 3 5-second penalties he picked up still meant he finished in 11th. It's difficult, isn't it, when you're at the back of the grid and you're such a talent and you don't get the results you want. So I do feel a little sorry for him, but also, it's a tremendous farewell celebration that we had in Abu Dhabi for him as well. But I've got a feeling that if the right door opens for him, he'll be back. Remember that mid-season? I think we were at Spa and all that crazy business with him and Christian about a Red Bull deal, and one denied that we hadn't spoken. And
this was the Ricciardo seat, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then he said, "No, we've spoken about 6 times about this," and so he still likes to play games, and he's good fun, and it will be Formula 1 will be a much poorer place without him next year.
Someone above him in this list, World Championship runner-up, Sebastian Vettel, number 3. No change from last season, according to our team principals. So they thought he was equally as impressive as 2017, I presume, from that. What do we make of Vettel in the top 3?
I think that's probably about right. I think the problem is his season is characterised by the mistakes he made. Error in the German Grand Prix, costly. It swung the championship around.
Well, his mistakes take on a greater significance, don't they? Because he's in the title fight.
Because those points lost there in Hungary, not being on pole position in the rain when your car was good enough to be on pole position. So you remember those more as the story of the championship because he was in the fight, and then you kind of forget those afternoons where he was brilliant and was sensational.
A lot of those came at the start of the season, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. So your memory always gets a bit phased by what happened at the latter stages, clouds what happened at the start. But Bahrain was a brilliant win at the start, holding off the pressure from Bottas at that stage.
But then Baku made a mistake, challenging, didn't he? Locked up, went wide. Ricciardo made a mistake.
I get the feeling you think that he's a bit too high in this.
Austria qualifying, there was that problem, wasn't there?
Oh, the impeding of Sainz.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There was just.
And then we've got Monza, the collision with Lewis. We've got Austin spinning while challenging Ricciardo. We've got Suzuka, exactly. Spinning, challenging Max.
Too many mistakes, and I think he just needs to, a little bit like Valtteri does, just needs to clear his head and work out exactly where he's going wrong. There was some suggestion that Sebastian perhaps takes on a lot more responsibility than just driving the car. In his Red Bull days, he was able to concentrate on just driving it, and the management and the strategy and everything was all. You get the sense that sometimes he tries to take on a little bit too much. He's querying tyres that they should be on. I think was it Hungary in the qualifying in the rain when there was all sorts of strange sort of strategic plays, and I think that he's so desperate to emulate his great hero Michael Schumacher and win the championship for Ferrari that the pressure builds and he takes on perhaps too much when he should just focus on the purity of what he's so good at, which is driving.
Well, Vettel himself admits that this wasn't one of his finest seasons. You think number 3 is about right? Where would you have him in the top 10?
I'd say 5th.
Okay, so Alonso, Ricciardo, slightly more impressive.
Yeah, and maybe Leclerc in his first season as well.
So 6th, if we do the maths correctly.
Fernando maybe not so high. So yes, what did I say? 5th.
5th. Okay. On to the top 2. Well, we know number 1, so actually not onto the top 2, only onto number 2 of the top 2, and that is Max Verstappen. No change for him. He was voted number 2 driver in 2017 as well. I think that's probably fair enough, isn't it? A difficult start to the season, but since Canada, he was excellent and stronger than Ricciardo, certainly.
Yeah, he's had the flip season to Seb. The mistakes came at the beginning, so we've almost forgotten them. And an amazingly strong finish to the season. But I think you've got to judge how he's performed over the year, and those mistakes defined the second half of the year. He understood what he was doing, is pushing too hard, overdriving, trying to be too quick, having gone into the year hoping Red Bull could fight for the wins, knowing that it was all down to getting onto at least the second row of the grid, possibly the front row if he could. So trying too hard to do the impossible with a car that was down on power and maybe wasn't as well settled as it was at the end of the year, but he got his head sorted, came through, and some of the performances were sensational. I think Brazil, despite failing to avoid getting into trouble with Ocon, and I think you've got to judge that as a 50-50 incident. Both were at fault. Both could have avoided that.
It was a great drive, wasn't it?
Sensational drive to have come charged through, clean overtaking moves, been on the way to win on a day when few expected Red Bull to be anywhere. I think sensational, and I think if Honda can give them a step, it may not be as big a step as they believe it will be, but if they can get a step and Red Bull can build on the car, he's ready to gun it.
I went to see Nico Rosberg in Monaco at the start of the season as we were looking ahead to this year for a F1 racing feature, and he's very telling line. He said to me that even he's sad when Max Verstappen is no longer in the Grand Prix, because he just has this sort of watching it from a fan perspective. You just know he's going to do something electric and exciting and haywire almost in his on-track performances. So it's brilliant to watch, and so it's always great to have him in a race. I mean, when he went out in Brazil, but I think what we're seeing with Max is how we're watching him mature, aren't we? Because he's still so young. Normally, drivers when they get to Formula One have gone through this process in the junior formulas, but because he came in so early, we're seeing so much of that process at the moment. So watching him mature has been an interesting journey and a narrative this season.
What do we make of his change in approach? Because as you say, there was quite a clear demarcation between the early races and the nadir of Monaco, and then everything he did from Canada onwards. And if we look at the team principals rankings, he's almost 80 points behind Lewis in the scoring system, so there's clearly, in their minds at least, a big gap between where Verstappen is now and where Lewis is. So how does he bridge that gap? Because he looks potentially the most likely as a driver.
Yeah, it's taken off the low points. I mean, Lewis was just sensational this year. That as the pressure ramped up, he just got better and better and better. Days like Monza, for example. Monza's my favourite Grand Prix of the year. I think just a phenomenal weekend, summing up
because of the wine.
Pizza and wine. A weekend Ferrari had the car to finish 1-2, should have finished 1-2. The management should have got those drivers by the neck, told them we're doing this. This is how lap one's playing out. Sort it. Yeah. They didn't.
And you had a guy winning in a slower car.
And then Lewis, Phenomenal move on. He saw an opportunity with Seb, put himself in position. Seb messed up, and then the strategy and putting Kimi under enough pressure to blister his tyres, pulling off the win on their home turf was just phenomenal. That's the sort of thing Max needs to do. He needs to avoid getting involved in trouble, getting involved in incidents and accidents. So you wipe out those bad days, lift yourself up to the consistency he found in the second half year. That's how that gap gets bridged.
I tell you, I think it was last season, Malaysia, and Lewis was leading and Max was coming through quickly. And Max you knew he was just going to throw one down inside of turn one, and Lewis just let him by, knowing I don't need to be racing this fellow. He's clearly on a different agenda. If I just pick up points for second place, and I think that's probably what Max needs to do sometimes. He needs to pick his fights on the racetrack at the right time. But backing up what you said about Lewis, I don't remember a clear mistake he's made this season. I think the last time he hit the wall was in qualifying for Brazil last year. So just a sign of how incredible he's been this season.